A child born today. What kind of classroom awaits the child born today? What kind of an education system would be waiting for him or her? A classroom filled with screens. Can schools in the year 2030 afford to graduate students who just don't do numbers? If all education is going to be delivered through screens, will it change what we learn and how we learn? How do you teach the young that they will need to learn continuously and do it on their own initiative for the contours of the classroom of 2030? That's tonight on the agenda from Waterloo, Ontario.
Education as we know it began with a priest passing knowledge to specially chosen initiates. Then from tutors to privileged pupils. Then from teachers to large classes in the factory model. As students, we have learned by rote, by copying from written texts, by instruction from authority. This form of education hasn't accommodated individual differences amongst learners. We have processed students in batches, which has created disparity and a barrier to higher scholastic achievement. We are in the midst of a huge experiment, and we don't yet know what works.
I looked at the current educational system. I said, what's wrong with it? And the biggest problem that I found was it didn't know how to motivate kids.
Every person alive, it's in our DNA to be motivated. I think the current model, and I'm not picking out any players, the current model is just really good at squashing that motivation.
Let's look at some of these numbers here, because this may echo what we've just been talking about. There's a group called the Canadian Education Association, and we've had their representatives on previous programs. And they talk about student disengagement, and some of these numbers are not terrific. They measure it in three ways: social, institutional, and intellectual. About 5 years ago, they discovered that 30% of students were disengaged socially, 30% had spotty attendance, and more than 60% were intellectually disengaged. Engagement meaning a serious intellectual or emotional investment in learning. Another one of their studies shows, and this one's even more frightening, when you're in grade 5, your intellectual engagement level's at 82%. By the time you get to grade 11, it's 41%. It's fallen off by half. What do you infer from all of those numbers?
I think that should be a real rallying cry. That's a clarion call for action. If you have, and I know that in high school levels, you have less than 50% reporting. These are students reporting on their own intellectual engagement. Students themselves are saying less than 50% of them are feeling intellectually engaged in their own learning. So it's what's bringing people like us here to talk about how do we change the system, how do we change the schools.
Almost failed grade 11 math. Whether it was my work habits or not, I honestly can't recall. I don't remember learning anything. I don't remember, working hard on math. It was probably me just not putting enough effort.
The thing with me is that I don't do good in school because it's more like if I have no interest in it, I don't really like to spend my time on it. So I do just enough to get passed, basically. That's kind of how I am as a student.
I found you had very little choice in the matter in terms of what you would study and what you would be delving into. They kind of lined up a number of courses for you and said you are going to take this, 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 and this. If they're not relevant, if they don't pertain to your interests, that doesn't matter to us. This is what you're doing.
I think, though, that if we're talking about learners, I think a lot of learners are more engaged in their own learning than ever before. What they are disengaging from is the public education system that isn't meeting their needs. So in other words, I think they are much more active in identifying what they want and what they think they need to be successful. And the public education system isn't giving them what they need.
Our class was always more fun, You could talk with your friends while working, you could go on computers, look for inspirational things, listen to music. You were a lot more inspired in that class, and the teachers were really supportive of that.
High school should be like a drama class. They should reenact the scenes, but instead they just go straight forward and they go strict ways. instead of going fun ways, because more people learn easier if you're happy and it's funner, instead of like angry and strict.
You try, as a part of what you do, to reach out to disengaged youth, and how much of their feelings of disengagement stem from the last couple of words that we heard from that last student. They see school as a place that is angry and strict.
Absolutely. I think that they see school as a place that is angry and strict because that is how those school systems are responding to students who do not conform to the very singular way that we teach and that we expect students to learn. So this in turn frustrates students, and that frustrates teachers who may not be necessarily well equipped to cater to those students, who may learn differently, who learn better standing up, who learn better moving around. It's a lot to ask for in a class of 20, 25, 30, whatever it may be. If you're having, does that mean that you divide the classroom into a number of small groups to cater to everybody's interest? Maybe that's not what's most appropriate, but the point is that they don't feel like their needs are being met in the classroom, and I think it's only natural that that atmosphere of frustration and anger would come out of that.
Michael, let me ask you a little more about that role. If you have an engaged, curious student, a teacher's job is one thing. If you have students who are not so curious, not so engaged, presumably the teacher's job is completely different?
Yeah, and this is one of the great stresses of teaching, is that very often you fall into crowd control, you fall into damage control, anger management, And it's so important to say that teachers are as much, it's a strong word to say victims, teachers are as much victims of the system as kids are. Many teachers will tell you, I wish it was different. Many teachers watching tonight's show will say, yeah, this is all wonderful. I'd love to work in that kind of system, but it's not the kind of system we have now. And I think there's a real tendency to say, those teachers are uphold, the prison wardens love, in a sadistic way, this power they have. No, teachers are stressed too, because teachers want to connect with kids. A good teacher loves learning, loves kids. But in the province of Ontario, for example, we have a very curriculum-centered educational system. And the teacher really feels his or her job is to disseminate that curriculum. And so their hands feel tied as well.
My high school experience, at least in Syosset, was pretty horrible. It was a devastating experience in the sense that it was a ruthless, competitive, stressful, and pressure-packed environment that basically sucked the curiosity out of children, in simplest terms.
Don't hold back. Tell us what you really think here, all right? Really? What made it so?
So, I mean, it was a very high-ranking high school. So the only purpose for kids in the school was to get into a high-ranking college. Everything else was secondary. So there was cheating, there was a lot of pressure, competition. Everything was about getting high test grades and good grades in general. It just was not very an authentic environment altogether, and I felt very frustrated with it.
When I was in school, I really felt like people weren't pushing anyone hard enough, right? There wasn't enough. A project had a deadline of 2 weeks, but really it could have gotten done in a night. And I think it's unacceptable that in a place where there are so many resources, we weren't pushing harder and asking people to do more with their time. I think being well-rounded is being mediocre. I think that the Picassos of the world should paint, and I think that Fitzgeralds of the world should write, and I think that Michael Phelps should swim. So I think that the best way to become exemplary, to become excellent, is to focus. And I think that students today aren't focusing enough, and that's why we have people who aren't achieving as much as they should.
Well, we know that one of the things that creates great students are great teachers. And again, we want to hear from students talking about teachers. Roll tape, please.
Half of the teachers that did not care, and they were boring, they were uninterested in what they were teaching, and they did not care if you took in the information and did your homework or whatever. Like, it was their job, they were doing it, and they weren't going to exceed it.
The teachers in Ontario, I would say they were somewhat disengaged, yes, and that led to the students being disengaged as well. From what I can tell, teachers get bounced around quite a bit within the Ontario school system. So if somebody has a degree in, let's say, English literature, they might be forced into teaching science, even though they know almost nothing about it. And that's just awful. That doesn't lead to a good experience for the teachers or the students. It leads to everyone struggling a little bit.
But then you had a handful of other teachers that they would go the extra mile to bring in a specific movie or to change up a textbook reading to make it more interesting, and you could tell if they were doing this for science or art, they actually liked it. So I think that makes a big difference, and it's also very engaging when you have a teacher that you see they really like something, and if you don't really like it, you kind of look like, well, if they see something in it that they like, maybe I should give it a shot at least to get a good mark.
Not that long ago, schools and teachers decided whether it was the students who lived up to their expectations. Today, we seem to be in a different world where students, and we've seen this in the videos, it's the students who sit in judgment of the teachers and the principals and the education system to see whether they are meeting the students' needs. John, start us off. Is that the way it should be?
I think it's absolutely a sign of the times in terms of where we need to go, in the sense that student voice in the governance of education, in identifying and being able to follow their own passions and being able to identify what they're interested in and working with teachers. And so the model where it used to be the teacher at the front dispensing knowledge to the student, and very articulate students there saying, if the teacher didn't care or wasn't passionate, then I'm not passionate. This has got the new model would be one more of a collaborative approach between students and teachers. And I agree 100%, that's a new role for teachers. There has to be some training there. And it's a new role for students as well, and so there needs to be some nurturing of that.
But if that's the way it is, teachers had better get used to the new normal, right?
Yes, and we need to support them in that regard. That's absolutely, we have great teachers. I think some of them are as disenfranchised as the students within the current model. And the other thing that Canadians have to understand, there are great examples of this happening in pockets across the country. So it's not like we don't know what works. The problem is it's not systemic, and it's not something that is necessarily recognized in policy across the country.
Some people will say, you're students, you don't know anything. Therefore, giving you a role in shaping that which you need to know doesn't make sense. You want to come back on that, Sam?
I'd love to.
Thought you might.
No, I think that's a completely understandable approach to think, yeah, your students, you don't know what you need, we do. But the problem is, it doesn't matter what you think we need. Everything shows, all the evidence shows that we're not going to learn it if we don't think we need it. It's pretty clear that if you're not engaged, if you're not excited about something, you're not going to learn it no matter what someone else thinks. So I think that's sort of missing the point about who knows what people need to know. What people think they need to know is what they're going to learn.
So we cannot threaten you or browbeat you or cajole you into learning what you don't want to learn anymore. Is that right?
Well, we've been trying to do that for a very long time, and clearly it's not working anymore.
Yes, I think that there should be the opportunity for students to have feedback into their teachers. But I think that the number of checks and balances, the unexpected attendance from the state to make sure you're doing your job, the league tables and everything else, these work against the teacher. They make the teacher risk averse. It's very difficult to innovate if you're going to be severely penalized for some kind of failure. Innovation is messy. If you want our teachers to innovate, we need to cut them some slack. I think there's too many of these constant focusing and blaming and trying to catch them doing things wrong when we should be catching them doing things right.
How do children learn to use computers? Nobody seems to be actually teaching them. So I stuck a computer in a slum wall, a nice big computer in those days with a nice big broadband connection, in front of children who had never seen computers before, hadn't heard of the internet, had no clue what was going on, didn't know English. And they started browsing in about 5 or 6 hours' time. And then it happened over and over and over again everywhere, until the experiment kind of burst out onto the world media with the statement that children anywhere in groups can teach themselves to use a computer. There appears to be no limit to this, that children can teach themselves almost anything if given the internet, given the permission to interact with each other, and given the absence of the teacher. The absence of the teacher in the presence of the internet can become a pedagogical tool.
Okay, Michael, you're the teacher here, so I want to get your feedback on that last line of Mr. Mitra's there, which is, the absence of teachers can be a pedagogical tool. It doesn't seem to make sense on the face of it, but...
Yeah, particularly for the kind of kid coming into our schools today. The internet went public around 93. First web browser was 95-ish. So these kids born in the age of the internet are just finishing secondary school. Kids coming into school today have a totally different mindset from the one we did. We came from a pyramid world, top down, do what you're told. Why? Because I said so. Kids coming into our schools today, they want to know why this is relevant. They want to know why I should do this, and the answer, because I said so, isn't good enough. They're coming from a screen world where they have total control and total autonomy into an old 19th century factory model where there's a teacher standing at the front of the room telling them to do boring things.
The sage on the stage, as it were.
The sage on the stage, chalk and talk and so on. And this is the great conflict we face in schools today, is the cultural revolution we're living through as a result of the internet and this old 19th century pyramid model, top-down, of the teacher at the front of the classroom. So yeah, you know, in my latest book, I talk about the school of the future is the decentered school. School is going to have to become much more fragmented. And you're going to have kids in the workplace, you're going to have kids doing all different kinds of things.
And I think what it shows is that kids are resourceful, they're curious, they have these skills, they're great learners naturally, and they can learn a lot on their own. But that doesn't mean that the absence of teachers is the key, and I think we want to be careful there. So Michael's talking about a fragmented school, a decentralized school, and I completely agree. You know, I designed a school that was led by students, but I don't think absence of teachers are the key, is the key on its own. Teachers are great. They're wonderful. They serve a great role, and I'm not just saying that because Michael's sitting 2 seats over. No, I think teachers serve a great role because, yes, those students were able to surf the web and gather information. And yes, in the 21st century, all of us, we're all growing up able to gather huge amounts of information on our own without some teacher at the front of the classroom teaching it to us. But teachers still have an enormous role in terms of guiding us, pushing us, teaching us modeling things like skepticism, and helping us become inspired to enjoy reading. So not having the teacher in the classroom at all, I think, is a huge mistake.
I think the key thing in any sort of relationship where you're trying to absorb information is that you have to seek them out. You have to be active and pursue and have very specific things that you're trying to achieve, right? So, you know, when you go to a teacher, you need to say, these are the things that I want. And the key thing, I think, about teachers and the way that education needs to change is that students need to be able to think from a longer perspective. They need to be able to project out for a year and say, where do I want to be a year from now? Where do I want to be 2 years from now? And teachers need to be helping those students get to that point, get to where they are going to be in a year, instead of, you know, laying down a curriculum and saying, this is where you're going to be in a year and this is how you're going to get there. Students need to have the initiative, the drive, the motivation, and the resources, the teacher, the institution, to be able to create that plan and create that path for themselves.
Kayla, help us with this. The qualities of a great teacher are what?
I feel humility. I feel a mutual respect as learners. Because I feel, as Sam said, that the key thing here is not that we don't need teachers, it's that we need to redefine together what that role is and make that more relevant for the 21st century, and also just humanize it a bit, because it's gotten into a bit of a power play sometimes, and a hierarchy I don't feel is reflective of the true relationship between humans outside of, or I don't think it should be anyway.
What if I were to say that arithmetic, as we teach it today, is an obsolete skill? Okay? The whole world will erupt if I say that, because they will say, reading, writing, arithmetic. That's the core of whose education? Core of the military education. Go back 200 to 300 years in this country and say that You know, 300 years later, no one's going to teach anybody how to shoot a gun, and no one's going to teach anybody how to ride a horse. And the teacher is going to say, but, you know, I mean, those are basic life skills. This guy will get killed when he moves out. And you have to say, no, ma'am, the world will have changed. These things will become sport. Shooting is a sport. Horse riding is a sport. Will arithmetic be a sport in 2061?
Arithmetic as a sport. Interesting. Neil, let me get you in now. We're trying to understand what makes somebody scientifically literate. Would you include basic arithmetic skills on that list?
Yeah, I think it's a foundation for scientific understanding of the world. In some ways, in many ways, the most successful sciences are those which translate properties of the world in mathematical terms, because that is our most precise way of understanding the world.
Tell me why it's still important nowadays to know off the top of your head what 7 times 7 is without using a calculator or a smartphone. Why do you need to know that?
Because using your calculator to do everything, just like driving everywhere will atrophy your muscles, using your calculator will atrophy your mind. And you won't actually understand the number system. And for the restaurant bill, that's usually not a problem. There's a tip table you can use. But where it becomes a problem is as a citizen of a democratic society. We have to understand when we see the government budget, what fraction of our spending is going to education, what fraction is going to health, what fraction is going to bombing other countries. These are all parts of the budget you want to see and feel at a glance in your brainstem. The only time that I helped somebody cheat in school actually relates to this. So I helped somebody cheat in 9th grade in history class.
Okay.
We had a geography test, and we had to list all, for each country the teacher gave us, we had to say how far it was from the center of the universe, also known as the United States. And so all of a sudden the person next to me says, "Psst, how far away is Cuba from the United States? 1,000 miles? And I said, after a bit of moral doubts, I thought, no, 90. And so then everything was fine. The teacher said, well, everyone did well, except one student said Cuba was 90,000 miles from the United States. So this student has no conception of the size of the world. They're pre-Columbian times. And then, I thought about it a little more. I thought, that's halfway to the moon. But given what we learned about Cuba, maybe that's not so implausible. But so the mathematics there actually organizes a whole bunch of random facts. You can actually see what's close, what's near, what we have to worry about, not worry about, and everything else, everything turns into random junk without a mathematical organization. And that's what we could actually show students the value of mathematics in.
The questions you're asking are dealing with now, but the pace of change is so rapid with technology and the technologies which are coming. So if you think about digital technologies, for example, as a tool, or if you think about just numeracy as what students need now to cope with what they may have to do in the workplace now, you're missing the big picture, which is the world is changing so fast. We don't really know what's coming. There may be things coming like quantum computers, which can handle data on a vastly greater scale, and will be very, very important for all aspects of society, for health, for education, for industry.
And therefore what?
Pardon?
And therefore what?
Well, therefore, the kids of today need to be taught the skills that enable them to think for themselves and to handle the unpredictable. Tidal wave is coming, and we don't have the policies or strategies in place to deal with it. Everyone knows this in education.
What's the tidal wave you're referring to?
The tidal wave is the internet, online teaching, the greater demands on the kids when they graduate. That if they're going to be successful in life, they need to be much quicker on their feet. They need to deal with all kinds of complicated situations, which people didn't have to before. So they know the demands are greater than ever.
And the PISA scores don't reflect that?
No. I mean, I think there is a common awareness that the standards within schools are dropping. And you can always recalibrate your scores to make it look like it's rising, but actually it's dropping. I mean, I taught in Cambridge as well, and I could compare the exam papers done in the 1960s by students with the ones being done today, and there is no comparison. The standards have declined dramatically.
Which Cambridge are you talking about?
England.
You mean Cambridge, England? Okay.
Cambridge,
because he
England.
lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts,
But
which is
I was
why-
talking about Cambridge, England.
And you were talking Cambridge, England. Okay.
So, you know, it's a consequence of partly of the massification of education. We have this idea that everyone in society must go through exactly the same system and get qualifications. And we've turned our schools and universities into factories.
Let's hear from Ian and then Andy on this as well.
At the same time, though, if you look at the very brightest high school students out there in mathematics and compare where they are now to where the brightest students were 10 years ago or 20 years ago when I was in high school, there's no comparison whatsoever. The students are so much more advanced now than they were when I was in high school in the early 90s. If you compare to I was a good math student, I did very well nationally on competitions. If you compare what students can do now, so much more than what we could do then.
A 5-year-old today, by the time he's 25, it's going to be 2031. Can any teacher say that they're preparing that child for 2031, for an unknown world? Well, I believe that I can make a curriculum for that teacher, and that curriculum needs to have only 3 things in it. Reading comprehension is the most critical skill at this point in time for a generation that's going to read off screens for the rest of their lives. Information search and retrieval skills. If people know what are keywords, follow a link or not, it's a key skill. If arithmetic is an outdated skill, this is the skill that will replace it. And finally, if a child knows how to read, if a child knows how to search for information, how do we teach them how to believe? How early in a child's life can we put that in there? If we can do it really, really early, then we would have armed that child against doctrine.
Your kids are using screens, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
They are in grades 3 and 4, and they are using screens.
Yeah, so in my classroom, we have one-to-one iPad, and it's a magical place. It's a place where my students demonstrate their learning through making movies, and they're at the center of their learning, and they're creating these cinematic experiences of what's happening every day. So instead of creating real-life application, we're doing real-life application and something that maybe could be. And what child doesn't want to participate in something greater than themselves, more magical than themselves? And I don't think we often associate the word magic with school, and I'd like to see that happen.
I believe that we're so focused on games and technology being a distraction that we completely ignore and we don't realize the full depth of its learning potential. And I remember the first time I got a small group in Ottawa of 8 to 13-year-old girls in this community center, and within the span of an hour, I showed them how to create a text file in HTML, and I showed them how to open it in a browser, and they realized they had just created a website, and it clicked that they had just created a website, and it was like moment of epiphany on their faces as they realized this is really cool. I've never even seen this ever before. Like, I've never been able to write something that that the computer will take, and I've never been able to manipulate the computer like this. And often that's something that I look for in my classes. I try to create that click where the students actually realize that they're really controlling the computer in a really meaningful way, and often a very creative way.
Is it important for kids to know how to write code? I don't need to know how the engine works in order to drive a car. So why do I need to know how to write code to use a computer?
Well, I already know the alphabet, and other people know how to write, so why should I learn how to write? Other people are writing books. Why should I learn how to write? And so really, code is really, it's like the building blocks of computer science. And if you're not being introduced to the building blocks of something like the ABCs or basic numeracy and competency with geography and history and all the other subjects, then you're really not getting any sort of early access into something that I think is quite fundamental. And I think computers are changing the way humanity exists, and I think we need to be teaching our kids more about it.
Christine, a book is a single thing. A screen, a tablet is many, many, many things.
That's right.
How does that make a difference?
I think that as we move to tablets and other technologies, digital technologies like that, there is a certain breakdown in linearity. So when you take a book, there is a beginning and an end. And you usually move through it from beginning to end, unless you are a reader like me who gets impatient and kind of reads the last 2 pages to find out what happens, which is a terrible thing. But then there's just, I mean, it's linear reading, right? Whereas if you just want to talk about reading per se, when you read on a tablet of any kind, the linearity breaks down, which I think is ultimately a good thing, because what it allows us to do is, as you read, and you don't understand a word, for example, or you want to look up a definition, or you need more information on something else, you have that available to you literally at your fingertips, and you can move back and forth. But I do think there are going to be changes in our cognitive behavior because of that. I think that that type of technology is so pervasive in a sense that it really is going to bring about a change in our mindset.
That's what I wanted to follow up on. This has the potential to, in some respects, rewire our brains, does it not?
I think so. I mean, I'm not at all a neuroscientist, obviously, but you can already see it in the way even the young generation now that is in schools thinks about information. So when you go to a regular curriculum, I mean, you have your segmented disciplines that come in silos, and that really reflects the way that we have been processing information, if nothing else. There are lots of other reasons for it, but that as well. So the way we have been processing information is much, much more linear, organized, structured in batches kind of thing. Whereas with the new digital technologies, there's no need for that anymore. And when children nowadays, when they need to find information on whatever topic, and even if they just Google it, I mean, there is nothing to say that information doesn't come from social sciences, from the arts, from physics. I mean, it comes from all kinds of different disciplines, right? So the word interdisciplinary means something to us. I don't even think it means anything to the younger generation coming up. It just is.
It's just natural. That's the way it goes.
There's a huge danger there, too. I mean, when you present that to a student, when you present a textbook it kind of has a positive side to it. It's been filtered, it's been selected, it's bounded. So that linear knowledge adds a certain level of support to the teacher and to the student in the classroom. So, the unbounded nature of knowledge online and with these devices is very, very powerful. But we have to be thinking about the whole set of skills then that go around that.
And if a teacher's going to move from the front of the classroom into the center, the teacher really needs to be a curator. That's quite a huge role that teachers can play to kind of combat that, I think.
Absolutely. And to be a curator, you have to hone your attention skills. You have to be able to be, I joked earlier about, it'd be a scary future if computers controlled humans, but if you're skipping happily hyperlink to hyperlink through, so you started with your book, but now you're off to something else, are you really achieving your task at hand? And that's a risk that we all face as we level up with technology, and we need to be teaching about that.
Greg, let me get you in at this point here. Help us understand, or characterize for us, if you would, the significance of this moment in history as we appear to be moving away from books and towards screens.
Well, I don't really see us moving away from books. I think we might move away from paper-based books, but we are moving to a different form of reading material. In fact, one of the things that I think is really interesting is it actually opens up access to more reading material in more forms. So whereas before, if I'm limited to books, then I'm limited to just one form. But now I have information that may be based on a narrative form, it may be based on other forms, it may be short text, it may be long text, it may be deep research. And I have all of those things available to me in the one device, which allows me to do a lot more with information. So to pick up on Christine's point, it allows me to bring together information and start to build new knowledge. So I think one of the most important changes we're going to see is that we've lived in a world that's been heavily focused on consumption of reading and consumption of information. I think we're going to move quickly to a world that's driven by creation. And so this is a tool that allows people to create new knowledge. And one of the pieces of work that we're working on at the moment, the company that I work for, is looking at how we can build a partnership that works within, say, sub-Saharan Africa and the developing parts of the world, where you can get access to low-cost devices, a $50 to $100 smartphone, and people can start to publish their own books, their talking books, on that phone in their local language, supporting their local culture.
Here we go. Learning focuses on the development of lifelong learning practices and a sense of self, rather than facts and figures. Learners have a well-rounded base of knowledge and a core set of skills, while establishing a depth of expertise in areas of interest that are framed by fundamental habits of mind. Michael, I thought we're here in one of the most prestigious institutions in the world for theoretical physics, where I think facts and figures matter a lot. And you guys are basically saying, easy with the facts and figures.
Everybody likes a fact, but they're not necessarily useful. And they're certainly not a skill. A fact is not a skill. And so you can take a fact into the workplace. If you turn up in an interview and tell somebody a fact, that's not going to particularly impress them. That's going to show you've got maybe a good memory. But if you can turn up with a skill, that's a very different thing. If you can demonstrate a skill, you can demonstrate the ability to interview well. You know, that you're a personable person, that you get on well with people, you interact well. You know, many jobs you'll go to now, and the interview and the selection process involves performing a task. You know, whether that's presenting or interacting with your fellow interviewees, and they're watching for these skills. And nobody's asking you, you know, what year the Battle of Hastings was.
1066.
Very good.
I think you need to know that stuff, though, don't you?
I think it's important that you mention where we are, because actually here at this amazing Institute of Theoretical Physics, the people who are here aren't the people who know the most, they're the best thinkers. So what we have in there is replacing facts and figures with these habits of mind. So we're not just saying, you know, don't teach people anything. We're saying teach them habits of mind, and that's what people at these amazing institutions have, you know, in abundance, which are being able to think critically, being able to be visionaries. You know, these are the things that we're trying to instill because they're much more important, especially at a place like this, than facts and figures.
You want to add to that?
I really like the emphasis on the habits of mind, and some of those habits being around recognizing context, local or global, looking at the motivation, the intrinsic motivation people have to learn. Because if the ultimate result are learners that are lifelong, people who recognize that we are living in a world that is constantly changing, and we know that the speed of change just keeps increasing, so I'm sure it'll be even faster in 2030. So I really like that emphasis on the habits.
But I think if you leave education, whether at university or secondary, with the skill of how to learn. I mean, when you go through this existing system, you're not being taught how to learn. You're being taught how to remember and how to regurgitate, as we've heard many of the panels say.
That's an important distinction, isn't it?
But to have, exactly, but to have the skill to know how to learn, and that to be a habit, I think that's the future. I mean, that's because we are facing an uncertain future. So we may have to relearn many times over. It's not like it was in my parents' generation where you had one career for life and the white picket fence and everything else. A lot of things are going to change. So I think that's a very important skill.
We require, it says, a radically different structure for learning in 2030, one in which traditional concepts of classes, courses, timetables, and grades are replaced by more flexible, creative, and student-directed forms of learning. Michael, do you want to get rid of grades?
You know, Steve, I was one of the really good students. You know, I was good at exams. The system suited me really well. So you said, you know, how come, you know, you did all right, didn't hold you back. And it didn't hold me back, but I really question now, especially having had this discussion all week, how many of my peers it really held back, you know, my classmates, the people who were with me, you know, who maybe just weren't so good at learning stuff for exams, which was, you know, really my forte. And so the idea that you would just have these people going through these systems and you know, they get to the end of something, and in a couple of hours, they've got a couple of hours, a window of time, and they might be feeling ill for those couple of hours or something like that. And sometimes their whole future, or certainly the future, you know, 5 years ahead of them, can depend on whether they can actually pull something out of the hat, pull something out of their brain that they might have actually studied up to 9 months ago. And it just seems a ridiculous way to assess whether somebody's learned something or not.
Just because it's in the final communique didn't mean you all agreed with it. So let me see a show of hands. How many people on this group today agree with getting rid of grades? Hands up.
If I may say...
Jennifer's hedging already. Go ahead.
No, I don't disagree. Yeah? I just want to emphasize that the idea is looking at a reevaluation of assessment and an emphasis on valuing a collection of experiences and focusing on skills and competencies. So the current assessment of how our system of exams and grades work is just not relevant, and that's what we're for.
We've heard some great ideas all week long. We've heard some wonderfully futuristic ideas, some wonderfully hopeful ideas. But we also know that, because we've heard it over and over again, the education system, it doesn't matter what country or province you're in or state, it's like a tanker. And it makes these very slow turns. And I want to just get into some discussion here about who's in the way of making all this happen. And let's name names, people. What's preventing this from happening? Gerson, start us off.
Oh my goodness. I think there's a certain amount of inertia in the current system. It's very exam based. It's very it's got a lot of structure. That we have a lot of preconceived notions that we've built an entire system upon. And when we start unraveling some cognitive education research and we start realizing that a lot of those assumptions are kind of faulty, how do you fix that part without destroying the entire system? And a lot of people advocate, well, that's why slow change is important, and you can't destroy the entire thing at once. And so I think that problem solving is not the hard part. It's choosing which problem to solve. And I'm 22 years old, and I'm a university student, and I wish I had this answer.
All right, Eric, you're not 22.
No.
Not much more than 22, but you're not. Who's in the way?
I think whoever is keeping students from having a say in their educational careers in the way, whether that be school boards, whoever that is. One of the things we talked about at the summit this week was the fact that we need to involve students more in that decision-making process. So pulling the decision-making out from the standard form that we have it now and inviting students to the table. I think once we get people like you 4 years ago into that decision-making, things can change rapidly. So whoever's keeping students from making decisions is at fault.
I think one of the areas that needs to be looked at really is policy, because it's amazing that we say to schools, we want you to change, and then we put you in a straitjacket.
Yeah.
And we say, you can't change because we're going to measure you this way, and we're going to do these things that we've done forever, and then you can't make those changes. So we need to work on policy, but the other thing I think is critical here, and this is where technology plays a really important role, is much better and much quicker measurement on what's working and what doesn't work. And so doing much faster iteration loops, much faster innovation loops.
Absolutely.
And schools are up for it, I think, but when you have a policy environment that says we've got to research this for 10 years and come up with an absolute definitive that it's going to work, and then it doesn't work, then we have a model that's broken around a policy structure.
A little over a minute to go. Michelle, who's in the way?
I will build on that point. I think that we're doing a lot of talking. We have some really fabulous words, some very flash words. We love to say 21st century skills, but I don't think we're doing enough. I think teachers, we need to be brave. We need to push ourselves to live in beta, and not with just randomly doing things in the classroom, but we need to iterate more quickly. And I don't think we need to all do this at once. Let's have some test cases and see how it goes and ask some good questions, because it's not all glorious and fantastic when you add a device. Let's see what the affordances are and the constraints. Let's do some testing and push out. I think we need to change the model of how we do professional development, as has been said here this evening. What we often do is we take the superstar teachers, we take them out of classrooms, we put them at the board office, and then they come and talk back to teachers about what we're supposed to do. Teachers, we're not super trusting always of people that aren't in the classroom, don't have classroom practice. Let's contextualize the learning. Let's live life in beta.
Let's live life in beta.
Let's try stuff out.
Cool. Eric, I wonder if you could follow up, just based on your experience, obviously, largest in the world publisher of educational tools. What percentage of teachers do you think are frightened that the world is changing in a way that will, in some respects, turn on its ear the way they were taught to teach once upon a time?
Yeah, I think that they're afraid of that anyway, regardless of technology, because I think there's a lot of chatter out there about the fact that they do need to get into the middle of the classroom, and they don't necessarily think that technology is going to do that. But I'll give you the case in Los Angeles. I was really concerned that after the first week of this implementation with these pilot schools, that these teachers would just be terrified. I think a lot of teachers are really scared of looking stupid in front of their kids. And so you get a device in front of them and they're not quite sure what to do, and it's just mayhem. But again, because we focused on a really robust pre-service training before they put it into the classroom, that made all the difference in the world. So I think they come a bit kicking and screaming and afraid, but as I have been hounding since the beginning of this program, it has to be about professional development.
It has to be about professional development, meaning?
Meaning that, you cannot just go to a teacher and say, here's the curriculum, here's some books, here's some stuff on an iPad, go for it. You really need to spend a lot of time with them, explaining to them what the possibilities are and how you actually get a good teacher like Michelle, who's done this, to come in or create some sort of program that shows those teachers what the possibilities are.
What I hear you saying is the pedagogy needs to drive the technology another way, not the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I mean, there's a lot of pressure on faculties of education, and we end up having these debates. We reduce it back to, well, we just need to improve teacher training, and that's just one piece of it. And in fact, we were speaking of these frightened teachers. Oh, poor us. But we exist in a much broader context, and so I think that a lot of us need to be brave. Our parents need to be brave. Our students need to be brave. Teachers need to be brave as well. And when we look at the education context today, I don't think when we look at a classroom we think, is this the classroom that's preparing us for 2030? In fact, I'm not even certain that we're looking at the classroom saying, is this the classroom that would prepare our students for today?
I wonder if parents aren't a big part of this problem here, because certainly this experience that we're all talking about tonight is utterly alien from anything any parent experienced when he or she went to school, however many years ago. Are they part of the problem? Selling parents on this new vision?
Problem. That word.
Part of the challenge, then. Let's put it that way.
I don't want to call parents problematic, because they're so important to the learning process, and they really, really care about hopefully they really care about their kids. And I think it's really, we come from this culture of, we use technology so much, and it's really, we're consumption-based culture, and we don't think from the point of view of a creation or a creative-based culture. And I think a lot of parents, when they see technology in the classroom, they're thinking video games and distraction and scary things like the internet. And the moment you start talking to them about how we're trying to really get children to understand how to create and how to be educated with these things, and we're talking about reshaping pedagogy, and then most parents start to nod their heads and say, this makes sense.
I think the pace of change in society has left teachers unqualified often to deal with the latest things where the kids can know more than the teacher quite frequently. So I think one of the things we've discussed at the summit going on at Perimeter is in what way will education be transformed leading up to 2030? And just, one of the ideas floating around, just to give an example, we all have a smartphone, or most of the society has a smartphone now. It's very likely that each kid will be carrying around with them a personal teacher, which will be an electronic device which can keep track of their own progress and can offer them guidance, what they should be reading, what they couldn't be reading, can offer them assessment. This is very, very likely that this will become possible. So one should view this as an assistance to the teacher, to the classroom teacher, that kids will have their ability for their own educational program to be tailored to what they're good at, what they love, what they want to do. Mm-hmm. And we need to start anticipating these changes and not imagine that the school system is rigidly fixed the way it is now.
And can you imagine a system, though? We're talking about building an entire education system for a country or a continent that could be that nimble that it could deal with all of the individual needs of each student.
So actually, the good news is we're not just designing one for a country or a continent, we're designing one for the whole world. And that's why some of us are here this week. And the other good news is that the kinds of things that we've been talking about up here, these more nimble educational approaches, they're actually much lower cost, much less resource dependent than some of the systems we have in place now. They don't require huge amounts of infrastructure and technology and textbooks. They require very simple principles. Now, I disagree slightly with Michael that we don't need an outcomes-based system. I think we do want goals for our education system, and maybe I misunderstood what you meant, but I think we do want goals. We just have very outdated goal, as Nikhil pointed out. We have goals that are based on, obtaining information, and now we need newer goals that are about making people, again, as I mentioned earlier, more able to appreciate evidence, slightly more nimble goals. But certainly, I can see schools all over the world, national systems, that are based on these basic principles of changing the role of the teacher and the student and changing the goals of our schools.
I know that's why you're all here, Nikhil, is to try to create a blueprint going forward for the world's education systems. Is that really doable?
Yeah, I think, so there's, around the world today, there are successful schools, and most people, that's often lost in the conversation. So for example, one of the things I've been researching for the past year for my second book is looking at Sudbury Democratic and Free Schools. And these schools have largely been around since the 1960s and 70s, really the influence of these schools came from a school in England called Summerhill. And Summerhill was founded by a man named A.S. Neal. And his belief was that school should fit the needs of the child rather than the reverse. So these free schools and democratic schools, they're based on the premise that children are natural learners. That if you trust a child, if you realize that if you give them the resources, books, literate adults, an environment with a lot of freedom and creativity, they will all rise up to the occasion. And so I visited a lot of these schools, and it's amazing because I would argue that most schools today are, in some sense, totalitarian regimes, where you have a small percentage of the population, the adults, deciding on behalf of the rest of the population, the learners, on how to learn, what to learn, and where to learn. And these schools, it's entirely based on democratic process. So the students actually vote on school policies. They have democratic meetings. They also have a judicial process. So if we realize that politicians need to get away from this notion of technocratic kind of mentalities based on big data and numbers and statistics, and move towards a system based on humanistic values, based on the values that we want to see in human beings, generosity, humility, perseverance, happiness, self-worth, all the attributes we want to see in our future population, then that's the system we can create. And I think it's absolutely doable.
I think change in education happens the same way that change happens anywhere, right? It's people doing things, making things happen. And I think everyone needs to take some sort of ownership over this problem. No one's a victim. No one, is powerless. And everyone just needs to say, okay, how much am I going to let happen? How much am I going to be passive? And how much am I going to say that, no, this is something that's really critically important, and this is something that I'm going to do something about, like Sam did at his school. And everyone, you ask, are we capable of it? It's not, we don't have to push this responsibility on other people. It's am I capable of it? Are you capable of it? Are we going to work together to make something happen? And, Nelson Mandela, says it perfectly. Everything is impossible until it's done. So let's just go and do it and, stop talking about it.
Michelle, you will still be teaching in 17 years' time, I'm sure. What's your classroom going to look like? Any idea?
I wonder if my classroom will look like a space where we don't necessarily move children along by their age and their grade. I wonder if we'll be more attentive to the individual needs of our students. Currently in Ontario, if you have a student with special needs, they're on an individual education plan. Don't all students have special needs? So what might that look like? It's difficult to scale something like that, but technology helps us do amazing things. So how could we scale individual education plans for all of our students, and then have them work in inter-age groups where we teach them about mentoring. And we talk a lot about bullying and acceptance, but then we separate kids into their age groups. And we have clubs, and those are all good things. But what do we do to bring students together that are across groups? So I wonder if it would look like that. I also wonder whether we'll become more brave and students will do even more making. I wonder about digital fabrication. I wonder about how coding comes off the screen and students make things in three-dimensional space. And I wonder what that might do to consumption of products. Maybe we're going to make things that are just exactly for us, and maybe we'll solve problems through the design process in our classroom. But we're still going to be able to read, because that's an amazing thing that humans do. And we're still going to be able to know math, and hopefully a lot more of it, because that opens up incredible doors. So there's still going to be those important basics that are the building blocks of our knowledge. And then on top of that, it's going to be personalized. And on top of that, it's going to be deeply connected. And on top of that, It's going to be awesome. But I just want it to happen sooner.
And we'll continue our exploration of the future of learning every second Tuesday of the month, either on air or online all season long.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.